Hi, class. Welcome to Chapter 7 of Frederick Douglass. Just a brief review of Chapter 6. We have Frederick Douglass in Baltimore now, and Mrs. Old is his new mistress. And he really was shocked when he went because this was the first time that a white person ever smiled at him. It talked about her having a beaming smile when she looked at him. But very quickly, she turns from this beautiful angelic creature to this like horrible demonic one in his descriptions. And he talks about the poison of being a slaveholder doing that. Okay. We also find out in the previous chapter something really important. Frederick Douglass learns the key to freedom is learning to read. Literacy is the key. Okay. Mrs. Old started to teach him, but then her husband said, no, don't, you'll ruin the slave, don't do that. And Frederick Douglass realizes, like, oh my gosh, this is why they don't let us read, because it's actually what's going to let us escape and find freedom. So chapter 7. I lived in Master Hugh's family about 7 years. During this time, I succeeded in learning to read and write. In accomplishing this, I was compelled to resort to various stratagems. I had no regular teacher. My mistress, who had kindly began to instruct me, had, in compliance with the advice and direction of her husband, not only ceased to instruct or stopped to instruct, but had set her face against my being instructed by anyone else. It is due, however, to my mistress to say of her that she did not adopt this course of treatment immediately. She at first lacked the depravity or the evilness indispensable to shutting me up in mental darkness. It was at least necessary for her to have some training in the exercise of irresponsible power to make her equal to the task of treating me as though I were a brute. So it wasn't immediate, her transition into treating Douglass like a brute or like an animal. It was gradual. She had to have that irresponsible power, having that power over another human, being a slaveholder, and it was a gradual descent. My mistress was, as I have said, a kind and tender-hearted woman, and in the simplicity of her soul she commenced, or began, when I first went to live with her, to treat me as she supposed one human being ought to treat another. So at first, she treated me like a human. In entering upon the duties of a slaveholder, she did not seem to perceive that I sustained to her the relation of mere chattel or property, and that for her to treat me as a human being was not only wrong, but dangerously so. Slavery proved as injurious to her as it did to me. When I went there, she was a pious, warm, and tender-hearted woman. Pious means dedicated to your religion, okay? There was no sorrow or suffering for which she had not a tear. She had bread for the hungry, clothes for the naked, and comfort for every mourner that came within her reach. So when I first went there, she was this kind, amazing woman. Slavery soon proved its ability to divest her of these heavenly qualities. To divest is to like undress or take off. So slavery took off these good qualities from her. Under its influence, under slavery's influence, the tender heart became stone, and the lamb-like disposition gave way to one of tiger-like fierceness. The first step in her downward course was in her ceasing to instruct me. She now commenced to practice her husband's precepts. She finally became even more violent in her opposition than her husband himself. She was not satisfied with simply doing as well as he had commanded. She seemed anxious to do better. Nothing seemed to make her more angry than to see me with a newspaper. She seemed to think that here lay the danger. I have had her rush at me with a face made all up of fury and snatch from me a newspaper in a manner that fully revealed her apprehension. She was an apt woman, and a little experience soon demonstrated to her satisfaction that education and slavery were incompatible with each other. Incompatible means you can't go together. You don't work together. So slavery and education cannot go together, according to slaveholders. From this time, I was most narrowly watched. If I was in a separate room any considerable length of time, I was sure to be suspected of having a book, and was at once called to give an account of myself. All this, however, was too late. The first step had been taken. Mistress, in teaching me the alphabet, had given me the inch, and no precaution could prevent me from taking the L. Remember in one of the previous chapters, you give an inch, they take an L. That's the same thing as our expression of give an inch, take a mile. So Frederick Douglass had a little taste of reading, and he's going to take all of it that he can. The plan which I adopted, and the one by which I was most successful, was that of making friends of all the little white boys whom I met in the streets. As many of these as I could, I converted into teachers. With their kindly aid, obtained at different times and in different places, I finally succeeded in learning to read. When I was sent on errands, I always took my book with me, and by going one part of my errand quickly, I found time to get a lesson before my return. I used always to carry bread with me, enough for which was always in the house, and to which I was always welcome, for I was much better off in this regard than many of the poor white children in our neighborhood. This bread I used to give to the hungry little urchins, who in return would give me that more valuable bread of knowledge. So an urchin, it would be in the 1800s, 1800s, there were a lot of children in cities who just would fend for themselves on the street, and they were called street urchins. I am strongly tempted to give the names of 2 or 3 of those little boys as a testimonial of the gratitude and affection I bear them, but prudence or wisdom forbids. Not that it would injure me, but it might embarrass them, for it is almost an unpardonable offense to teach slaves to read in this Christian country. So this is one of the first times we get a reference to religion here. Frederick Douglass says this Christian country, because Christianity is the major, it was then and it is now the major religion in America. Frederick Douglass is going to quite often refer to this Christian country and these Christian people, these Christian slaveholders, and he's going to do so and with a sarcastic tone. He's going to use what we call verbal irony, sarcasm. And he's doing it not because he hates Christianity, he's doing it because of the hypocrisy. How can you be a Christian and call yourself a Christian and yet treat a whole race of people so horribly? So he's trying to call out the hypocritical nature of that. It is enough to say of the dear little fellows, the white boys on the street, that they lived on Philpott Street, very near Durgan and Bailey shipyards. I used to talk this matter of slavery over with them. I would sometimes say to them, I wish I could be as free as they would be when they got to be men. You will be free as soon as you are 21, but I am a slave for life. Have not I as good a right as you to be free? These words used to trouble them. They would express for me the liveliest sympathy and console me with the hope that something would occur by which I might be free. So he's finding ways to use these white children on the street to help him to read. And they feel bad for him when he talks about how he'll always be enslaved. I was now about 12 years old, and the thought of being a slave for life began to bear heavily upon my heart. Just about this time, I got hold of a book called The Columbian Orator. An orator is someone who speaks for a living. Remember, Frederick Douglass is going to become an orator when he's adult. He's going to go around on lecture tours speaking. So he gets this book, The Columbian Orator. Every opportunity I got, I used to read this book. Among much of other interesting matter, I found in it a dialogue, a conversation between a master and his slave. The slave was represented as having run away from his master 3 times. The dialogue represented the conversation which took place between them when the slave was retaken the 3rd time. In this dialogue, the whole argument in behalf of slavery was brought forward by the master, all of which was disposed of by the slave. The slave was made to say some very smart and well as impressive things in reply to his master, things which had the desired though unexpected effect, for the conversation resulted in the voluntary emancipation or freeing of the slave on the part of the master. In the same book, I met with one of Sheridan's mighty speeches on and in behalf of Catholic emancipation. These were choice documents to me. I read them over and over again with unabated interest. They gave tongue to interesting thoughts of my own soul, which had frequently flashed through my mind and died away for want of utterance. The moral which I gained from the dialogue was the power of truth over the conscience of even a slaveholder. What I got from Sheridan was a bold denunciation or talking down on of slavery and a powerful vindication of human rights. The reading of these documents enabled me to utter my thoughts and to meet the arguments brought forward to sustain slavery. But while they relieved me of one difficulty, they brought on another, even more painful than the one of which I was relieved. The more I read, the more I was led to abhor or hate and detest my enslavers. So the more he's reading this is an abolitionist book. So it's a book written to make people want to abolish slavery. And the truths in it, the arguments against slavery, the philosophical arguments are all in there. But as he reads it, he's developing more and more hatred inside of white people. I could regard them in no other light than a band of successful robbers who had left their homes and gone to Africa and stolen us from our homes, and in a strange land reduced us to slavery. I loathed, I hated them as being the meanest as well as the most wicked of men. As I read and contemplated or thought about the subject, behold, that very discontentment which Master Hugh had predicted would follow my learning to read had already come, to torment and sting my soul with unutterable anguish. So Master Hugh was right when he told Sophia Old, don't educate him, you'll spoil him, you'll ruin him. Frederick Douglass says, yeah, he was right. I am ruined now. I'm not going to be a good, quiet, obedient slave my whole life because I know the truth and I can think for myself and I want to be free. As I writhed under it, I would at times feel that learning to read had been a curse rather than a blessing. It had given me a view of my wretched or horrible condition without the remedy, without a solution. It opened my eyes to the horrible pit, but no ladder upon which to get out. In moments of agony, I was jealous. I envied my fellow slaves for their stupidity. I have often wished myself a beast. I preferred the condition of the meanest reptile to my own. Anything, no matter what, to get rid of thinking. It was this everlasting thinking of my condition that tormented me. There was no getting rid of it. It was pressed upon me by every object within sight or hearing, animate or inanimate. The silver trump of freedom had roused my soul to eternal wakefulness. Freedom now appeared and to disappear no more forever. It was heard in every sound and seen in everything. It was ever present to torment me with a sense of my wretched condition. I saw nothing without seeing it. I heard nothing without hearing it, and felt nothing without feeling it. It looked from every star, it smiled in every calm, breathed in every wind, and moved in every storm. And the it he keeps referring to is freedom and the understanding now of what freedom is and why he should also have it. I often found myself regretting my own existence and wishing myself dead. Like he wishes he could be dead. Like that's how horrible it is to know the truth and but to not be able to have it. And but for the hope of being free, I have no doubt that I should have killed myself or done something for which I should have been killed. While in this state of mind, I was eager to hear anyone speak of slavery. I was a ready listener. Every little while, I could hear something about the abolitionists. It was some time before I found what the word meant. It was always used in such connections as to make it an interesting word to me. If a slave ran away and succeeded in getting clear, or if a slave killed his master, set fire to a barn, or did anything very wrong in the mind of a slaveholder, it was spoken of as the fruit of abolition. Hearing the word in this connection, very often I set about learning what it meant. So he wants to know, what does abolition mean? He didn't know, but he knew that it had something to do with slavery and freedom. The dictionary afforded me little or no help. I found it was the act of abolishing, but then I did not know what was to be abolished. Here I was perplexed. I did not dare to ask anyone about its meaning, for I was satisfied that it was something they wanted me to know very little about. After a patient waiting, I got one of our city papers containing an account of the number of petitions from the North praying for the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia and of the slave trade between the states. From this time, I understood the words abolition and abolitionists, and always drew near when that word was spoken, expecting to hear something of importance to myself and fellow slaves. The light broke in upon me by degrees. I went one day down to the wharf of Mr. Waters, and seeing two Irishmen unloading a scow of stone, I went, unasked, and helped them. When we had finished, one of them came to me and asked if I were a slave. I told him I was. He asked, "How are ye a slave for life?" I told him that I was. The good Irishman seemed to be deeply affected by the statement. He said to the other that it was a pity so fine a little fellow as myself should be a slave for life. He said it was a shame to hold me. They both advised me to run away to the north, that I should find friends there, and that I should be free. I pretended not to be interested in what they said, and treated them as if I did not understand them, for I feared they might be treacherous, dangerous. White men have been known to encourage slaves to escape, and then to get the reward, catch them and return them to their masters. So remember, that's that fugitive slave law. So there's white people who make a living convincing a slave to escape, telling them there's freedom and help in the north. Then they find him and return him to get the money that the master would offer for the slave's return. I was afraid that these seemingly good men might use me so, but I nevertheless remembered their advice, and from that time I resolved to run away. I looked forward to a time at which it would be safe for me to escape. I was too young to think of doing so immediately. Besides, I wished to learn how to write, as I might have occasion to write my own path. And that means if slaves were out, um, their master would write a pass for them, like Frederick Douglass is traveling to so and so's plantation and is not due back to mine until such and such time, and then that would legally allow the slave to travel. I consoled myself with the hope that I should one day find a good chance. Meanwhile, I would learn to write. The idea as to how I might learn to write was suggested to me by being in Durgan and Bailey's shipyard and frequently seeing the ship carpenters, after hewing and getting a piece of timber ready for use, write on the timber the name of that part of the ship for which it was intended. So timber would be a big piece of wood, and the men working there, they would write on the wood like what part of the ship that piece of wood is supposed to go on. When a piece of timber was intended for the larboard side, it would be marked thus, L. When a piece was for the starboard side, it would be marked thus, S. A piece for the larboard side forward would be marked thus, LF. When a piece was for the starboard side forward, it would be marked SF. For larboard aft, it would be marked thus, LA. For starboard aft, it would be marked SA. I soon learned the names of these letters and for what they were intended when placed upon a piece of timber in the shipyard. I immediately commenced or began copying them, and in a short time was able to make the 4 letters names. After that, when I met with any boy who I knew could write, I would tell him I could write as well as he. The next word would be, "I don't believe you, let me see you try it." And I would then make the letters which I had been so fortunate as to learn, and ask him to beat that. In this way, I got a good many lessons in writing, which it is quite possible I should never have gotten in any other way. So he plays this game. Of course, he knows that these white boys are going to be able to write better than him, and they're going to teach him by doing that because they're always going to beat him with the letters they can write, and then he'll be able to learn those letters as well. During this time, my copybook, my notebook was the board fence, brick wall, and pavement, and my pen and ink was a lump of chalk. With these, I learned mainly how to write. I then commenced and continued copying the italics in Webster's spelling book until I could make them all without looking on the book. By this time, my little master Thomas, that Thomas is the boy that Frederick Douglass is looking after. My little master Thomas had gone to school and learned how to write and had written over a number of copybooks. These had been brought home and shown to some of our near neighbors and then laid aside. My mistress used to go to class meeting at the Wilk Street Meeting House every Monday afternoon and leave me to take care of the house. When left thus, I used to spend the time in writing in the spaces left in Master Thomas's copybook, copying what he had written. I continued to do this until I could write a hand very similar to that of Master Thomas. Thus, after a long, tedious effort for years, I finally succeeded in learning how to write. All right, and that is chapter 7. So in the previous chapter, we see him learn to read, and now in this one, we see him learn to write. Thanks for watching.